everyone, my name is Ashton Gleckman and welcome back to Behind the Score. Today we have a very special episode because we are finally diving into Oppenheimer, a film I absolutely adore. I originally saw this movie, they put on a advanced screening, Universal, at the IMAX in downtown Indianapolis, and it was in 70mm IMAX, and I remember leaving the theater realizing that I had just seen something that is transcendent, that I've really never seen before. And this film just really blew my mind in terms of the way that it's able to make such a huge story about this one man, J. Robert Oppenheimer, a very complex but very consequential person in history, basically make it so personal. And throughout the film, Cillian Murphy is really our window into this story.
The music is embodying him, and the music has to come from his eyes, from his mind, and the audience is sitting, feeling everything through him.
Cillian Murphy is really our one through line that we're experiencing the story through. Part of the genius of the music is that it so closely captures Oppenheimer's personal perspective. The first thing we hear in the film is Oppenheimer's theme played on the harp, and the last thing we hear is Oppenheimer's theme played with this big arrangement. And Oppenheimer was a person very anxiety-ridden throughout his life, whether it was early on in school, throughout his life during the war, and then of course the security hearings. He was someone who always was haunted by something, and you see that in Cillian Murphy's eyes. And the music always has this sense of being on edge, specifically with the use of the violin, which is an instrument that can go from being very haunting to very beautiful in a matter of seconds. The music is also this amazing source of energy and momentum, helping sort of bring us through the narrative. There are so many cool techniques that Göransson is using in the film, and there's a reason that Can You Hear the Music, for example, has become so famous in the month since the film was released. All of it is playing into what Oppenheimer is feeling at this moment in his life, traveling the world, having this sense of intellectual curiosity, and the music moves in this amazing way with the Oppenheimer arpeggio. And as soon as you start adding the bass notes to it, you just have this sense of wonder and excitement, especially when it combines with those visuals. And it just keeps building and building and building. And that right there is Oppenheimer's theme, the descending fifth. Whether it's Göransson's score or Nolan's script and directing or Ruth De Jong's production design and Jennifer Lame's editing, everything is really trying to help us as an audience get into Oppenheimer's POV. And Cillian Murphy, just like he's the window into the story for us, all of the technicalities of the film are also playing into that as well. So in today's video, we're gonna take a look at the elements of the score, some of the themes that were used, the approach to the collaboration between Göransson and Nolan, and then we're also gonna dive into some standout moments from the film. And finally, I've arranged a suite of music, basically featuring some of the tracks from the soundtrack, such as Fission, Lowly Shoe Salesman, Gravity Swallows Light, American Prometheus, Los Alamos, and also I've done a couple of tracks from the promotional campaign. So the opening look trailer, which is sort of like a variation on Manhattan Project, and then trailer 1, which has a big statement of Oppenheimer's theme with French horns and percussion. For this Logic session, I've also attached a free download for the MIDI file down below, just in case you want to follow along. But thank you guys so much again for being here today, and grab a popcorn, grab a drink or a coffee, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and let's talk some Oppenheimer.
We work Monday through Thursday, and then on Fridays we watch the movie.
Wow.
And we keep doing that every week for, I think, 3 or 4 months. The first note that Chris had on the music, the first idea he had on the score was to use the violin as portraying Oppenheimer's personality and his emotional state.
So Oppenheimer is a 3-hour historical epic film written and directed by the great Christopher Nolan, previously known for Inception, the Dark Knight trilogy, Dunkirk, and Interstellar.
I think if you've seen any Chris Nolan movies, you know how important music is in his films. It's almost like its own character. And you understand immediately what an ear he has for music and how much time you actually have to put in music to be able to put that in your films. And he's extremely engaged in the music process from beginning to end.
The film is based on the book American Prometheus, written by Kai Bird and Marty Sherwin, and I had the chance to read the book before seeing the film, and what I found really interesting is how Nolan was able to adapt a 700+ page book. And of course you can't fit in every single little detail, but what Nolan did was pick the moments that really helped to define Oppenheimer's life. And because Oppenheimer created this bomb and basically plunged the world into the atomic age, Christopher Nolan has often referred to him as the most important man to ever live, because he basically helped to introduce the world to the very thing that could destroy it.
Science has profoundly altered the conditions of man.
It goes from an intimate personal journey to, I would say, like an operatic piece.
And just to illustrate how different and personal this film is, it's really the only film in Christopher Nolan's catalog, and maybe ever, to be written in the first person. And so the script sounds like this. Sparks explode in waves. I watch born and bore. Galaxies and particles disperse and reform. I read the wasteland. I write furiously at my desk. I write furiously on a chalkboard. I smash a glass.
I was immediately kind of floored by how it was different than anything I've ever read before. You know, specifically reading it out of feeling like you are Oppenheimer. Obviously, I get ideas from reading the script and how detailed everything in the script is. Even the sound. There's even sound design in the script, like the footsteps.
Oh, really?
The sound of silence after the trainer test. It's all in the script.
Can you stop? But later?
4, 3, 2, 1.
Before we head into elements of the score, just a little bit of background on Ludwig Göransson. He's a 39-year-old composer from Sweden, and he first went to music school in Sweden and then came over to the States, where he went to the USC film scoring program.
And I thought that I had to put everything else aside, my live shows, my trying to play in a band, my producing, and I just put all that aside and just focus on a singular thing, which was film scoring.
And as he was at USC, he met a young filmmaker there named Ryan Coogler. And Nolan and his wife, Emma Thomas, were actually invited to the premiere of Creed. And they went to the film, and one of Nolan's first questions was, who did the music? And it was this, young composer, Ludwig Göransson.
Ryan told me about this a couple of days later, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Obviously, I didn't think that anything was going to come out of it.
And Göransson is one of the recent collaborators that I think Nolan really has synchronized with, and they both connect in terms of the way that they see film and also the way that music fits into film.
I'm already spending so much time by myself writing the music and sitting in my studio, and you need to feel like you're getting something back. That's always important to me. I feel like I'm growing as a person. I feel like I'm growing as a composer. I feel like I'm learning something from the people I'm working with.
All right, so let's move into elements of the score. So I want to start off with one quote, and this is about basically the sound world of the film that Göransson created. He said, "We wanted to make it sound different and create experiences and sounds that you can't really put your finger on in terms of what it is." And the two words that Göransson and Nolan used in terms of describing what the score should be like is timeless and modern. They didn't necessarily want to write a period score that was going to be all orchestra and sort of conventional. They wanted to bring the film as well as the score into the 21st century.
We're using the instruments from the time, like the string orchestra or the orchestra, but we're doing it and we're recording it and we're manipulating it in a way you couldn't have done it back then. And we're using also modern sounds to manipulate.
The organic instruments are really the core of this entire film. The emotional heartbeat of the entire film is the harp and the piano. And the piano, of course, is Kitty's theme. And Kitty's theme is really the emotional heartbeat in terms of thematic material. Basically, the center of the score is orchestra. It's orchestra, harp, violin, piano. But then surrounding that, or sort of like the second layer of the cake, there is the more experimental sounds, like the synthesizers, for example, the use of production sound like feet stomping, the creepy sound design associated with the bomb itself, like in the track Ground Zero. From the very beginning of the film, they establish what the sound is, especially with Can You Hear the Music? It immediately tells you what the score is gonna feel like, and it's really the height of the ecstasy of the score in that way.
I wanted to start with was the emotional core, and not trying to hide with sounds or production, because that's also easy to do. Like if you have some really cool sounds or some technology or production ideas, like it's easy to kind of also sometimes hide behind that. But I knew as soon as I read the script that we need to get the emotional core right.
The synths to me feel like it's the future. It's the impending doom that I feel like you can already sense it in him in the beginning. That's why it's just introduced slightly in the beginning.
The next thing is the violin, who is very emotional throughout his entire life, and the violin captures that vulnerability, I think.
And my wife, Serena, is an incredible violinist, accomplished violinist, and I was lucky enough to spend like hundreds of hours with her in the studio, just pushing, recording violin and trying to push it in different ways that I haven't been able to before and heard it before.
The violin is really used in two different ways, either in playing melodies, especially in the solo violin, but also these big sort of string run passages. The next element is the percussion, or the lack thereof. So there are no taiko drums, there's no toms, there's no big sort of casa drum, there's no cymbals. The only percussive elements I really marked down was the metal sounds. So for example, when Oppenheimer's talking to Einstein outside by the lake, and they're talking about the possibility of atmospheric ignition, there's the little sound, it almost sounds like an anvil coming in. There's the foot stomping, which was actually recorded on set by the production team and then later sent to Göransson to use in the score. And then the decimeter.
And there's also some kind of soundscapes which are made from nuclear reactor type drums, moving energy sounds, but there's no drums.
The next element is the use of ensemble sizes. So basically, one of the things that Göransson does to create color in the score is by varying up the amount of players that are playing at any one point. One of the cool examples of this is the piece Quantum Mechanics, when Oppenheimer is giving the class to first one student and then there's more students in the room.
You have one solo violin, there's 4 people coming in, there's 4 more violins coming in, and then the whole class is sitting there and you have the whole orchestra playing.
So is that, in that sense, it's fairly literal in terms of, of the string section and the class.
Yes, at times it is very literal.
Basically, as a way of creating focus, just like a camera, he uses different ensemble sizes to create different senses of variation in the tone and in the color. The next element is the tempo. So the tempo is such a huge tool that is used by Göransson in the score. Often we think about tempo as just a way of structuring a piece of music. This piece of music is going to be 4/4 and the tempo is going to be 120 BPM. But Göransson uses the tempo almost like a tool of helping to create a sense of anxiety and also capturing the character of Oppenheimer, of constant relentlessness of all of the thoughts he's thinking about in his head.
I had the basic idea of Can You Hear the Music? But how important it was to work together with Jennifer Lame on all of this stuff, and seeing her and Chris, how they're cutting it shorter and cutting it together, and those intercuts between the molecules swirling around him and him laying in bed, and then also remember that Picasso painting, like, and how it just came together like magic, I would say.
Just as a fun fact, they had no idea how they were going to record Can You Hear the Music with all these tempo changes. And so Serena Göransson, Göransson's wife, basically had the idea, what if we feed the new tempo to the musicians before every single new tempo starts? So imagine being a player and you're listening to the tempo being played and 4 bars, tempo changes, 4 bars. It's so they would feed the musicians that new tempo just before the new set of 4 bars came in. It must have been so odd, and it took days and days and days to figure this out, but the final piece of music really shows. So let's talk about themes. So themes are basically little musical ideas. It could be a melody, it could be a certain kind of musical element that is used throughout the TV show or the film to describe a certain character, an arc, an event, something that continues to be called back to throughout the piece that allows us to sort of connect with that part of the story. So for example, one of the main themes in Game of Thrones is the Stark theme. Or the theme in the film Schindler's List, composed by John Williams, is... So themes are basically just a way of helping the audience be able to connect with a certain part of the story by means of music. And one of the first themes to be written for Oppenheimer is the theme for Oppie himself. And it's really this descending fifth pattern. And what's interesting about that is often with themes, they're always rising. So Prometheus, the theme from Harry Gregson Williams. And I think this downwards motion actually really describes Oppenheimer, someone who throughout his life, it was this downward spiral into a man being haunted by the events that had happened to him. And of course, specifically the events of the Second World War and the security hearings. So this can be used in many different ways. So in the first track, Fission, it's used in a pretty way with the harp. So let's see if we double this piano with the harp.
It definitely has this sense of haunting loneliness to it. And also like the way I think with Serena is playing it with just this kind of like, it feels like hauntingly melancholic to me.
That theme was also used in Can You Hear the Music? And the great thing about simple themes is that you can use them in so many different kinds of ways, in sort of big, massive ways like the Can You Hear the Music or the ending cue, or you can use them in very intimate ways.
Because I knew if you found that theme, if you found that melody, if you got that right, everything else would come to fruition.
The next theme is the Oppie arpeggio. So this is used in Can You Hear the Music, but also in quantum mechanics. It's basically a line that's ascending and then descending. And the interesting thing is as it's ascending, it's a little bit slower, and then when it's descending, it gets a little bit faster. So. And then it speeds up, of course. And for me, that theme sort of describes the mind of Oppenheimer as a character, all the things that are going on inside of his mind.
It's your question. It's not properly phrased.
Do you understand what I'm getting at?
I do.
Why don't you answer it that way?
Because I don't like your phrase.
So now we have Kitty, who also has a pretty haunted trajectory. She's someone who, she had come from multiple marriages before meeting Robert Oppenheimer, and one of her husbands had been killed in a war. And when she met Oppenheimer, basically she had to take care of the kids on her own. She had to move to Los Alamos and leave behind all of her work and basically resettle there in the middle of the desert, which was really difficult. So there's a sense of isolation to her and a sense of loneliness, but also a sense of defiance. Strauss's theme. It's a very simple harp motif. also has these chords that are relating to it. And that chord is really pretty. It's basically an A major chord with a seventh in there. So you have the A, B, and then an A major 7, but with a third in the bass. And then the Strauss harp theme comes in.
You don't take much on trust.
I don't take anything on trust.
The theme for Groves was originally written as part of Oppenheimer's musical material, but it was eventually adapted into Groves.
You know, he's a general, like, but he has this kind of sweet, lush tonality to his character, which I thought was, which is very interesting.
And then every time it plays, it sort of adds on top of that. So the next time it plays is. And then the next time. I like this theme a lot because it's very different, and it's definitely a much more synthesizer-based piece. A version of this piece is used just after the Trinity test scene. The next one isn't so much a theme as it is like a rhythmic motif, but I call it the Oppen groove. I have no idea where I came up with that, but I almost wish I hadn't come up with it. But here's what that sounds like. It's used in many different places throughout the score, including Los Alamos, for example, Manhattan Project. It's also used in the very end of the film when we're just about to go into the last reprise of Oppenheimer's theme. This one I call the Atomic Energy Commission theme. It's used initially when they're talking about, when Strauss is saying, "Robert, what did you do at Los Alamos?" They're all sitting around that table. And later on in the film, during the courtroom sequences, it's used. But it goes a little like this. And you can put a C under it and you really get what it feels like in the film. Again, it's a little simple idea, but depending on how you play it. It has a sense of that sort of spy 1950s McCarthy era.
What about Lomanitz? Lomanitz was never employed at Los Alamos. He was a liaison. Our security was tight as former.
This is the Power Stays in the Shadow theme. It's played on the harp. I often call it like the intrigue theme as well. There's the Gravity Swallows Light theme, a series of chords that are used a few times. You can hear this theme in the track Something More Important. And those are the core main themes that are used in the film. One of the things that Christopher Nolan really likes doing is getting his composers writing very early on. So on Inception and Interstellar, for example, those were two cases where he had Zimmer writing a lot of music while filming was going on, and he could be sending cues to the set and he could be listening to it on set. And by the time you get to the edit, you already have this library of music that's been written, and you can use that while you're putting together the first cut.
And this is music that, you know, we've been listening to, analyzing. We sit in the same room, I play it for him, and we point out certain details, like certain sounds, certain themes, things that we like, things that we don't like. Those molecules going faster in the fire, and how that felt sitting in a theater, like just seeing that. There was no sound, nothing, it was these beautiful images. And how can I get that tempo and that energy and with live instrumentation? And that was one of the big challenges.
Göransson decided very early on that he wanted to start with all the organic material. So for example, all the orchestral elements and the piano and the harp, and then from there build out into the more experimental sounds. Quantum Mechanics or Dr. Hill, all these cues that are very orchestral based is usually where he started. And then from there he began to sort of expand out.
When they're finished doing the film, Jennifer Lame and Chris starts kind of the movie together. And so they already had 2 or 3 hours of music to kind of start picking and choose from. So when we have a first cut, all of the music in the first cut is our original score for the film. After I see the first cut, that's when I bring all that music with me back to the studio and we start really sketching out and mapping out what's missing, where are we going to put it, how are we going to carve out the themes and carve out the score and mix it flow into each other. And it's really, it's a lot of work.
So a few of my favorite standouts from the score. First thing is the opening of the film. I think does a great job at basically introducing us to this character and basically establishing the sound world of the rest of the score that everything's gonna live within.
The easier parts were the things that I could identify with. Like in the beginning, you see him in his bed, you know, feeling like being lonely and feeling not understood, and kind of that was like, for me, it's like the loneliness, something I can very much relate to.
The next one is the Strauss intro, when Strauss and Oppenheimer meet at Princeton, and it's the black and white sequence, and we later see the color version of it. But this scene is scored like very, very subtly, and it's almost very nostalgic. This is when Strauss is obviously recollecting on the moment he met the great J. Robert Oppenheimer.
There's also hints of something of a mystery there, that they give a little taste, that there's a mystery involved in this, which is portrayed by the harp. And the harp is playing Strauss' theme. But the chords and the soft strings under it is kind of making it feel a little lush and like, don't worry about this. This is a good friendship. But there's always something kind of that makes you lean in and sitting on the edge of your seat.
Gravity Swallows Light is playing when they're all going out on that horseback trip to New Mexico. Oppenheimer gives the big speech scene. The music that's playing here is based on Gravity Swallows Light, because of course it's black holes eating up all of the light, and in this moment after the first atomic bombing, all of the light has sort of left Oppenheimer's world, and he's sort of in this void, this sort of state of paralysis where he doesn't know what to do.
You'd never imagine someone feeling like that or going through that, and it was so bizarre. And I think that's why it was the last piece of the music, last piece of the puzzle, because it took a long time for me to be able to go there myself and to be able to understand that feeling that he was going through.
Manhattan Project is a really cool piece when Groves and Oppenheimer are getting all the scientists together to come out to Los Alamos, because it's actually Kitty's theme that's being played. And it's interesting because you would think they're getting all these scientists together, why are we hearing Kitty's musical motif? Well, it's because Kitty is going to be directly affected by what's going on. She and the family are going to have to come out to the middle of the desert, and she really ends up going crazy, being out in this place where she has no interest in being. She's got to care for 2 kids, and this place will end up really consuming her daily life. And for me, it really feels like it's commenting on that subtext of what Los Alamos is going to do to Oppenheimer and his family. The ending of the piece Theorist is really beautiful. It's these big, expansive string runs. Colonel Pash is a creepy cue, and it captures the creepiness of Casey Affleck as Colonel Pash. Something about those blue eyes that stare back at you, and it's sort of in a much more menacing way than Cillian Murphy's blue eyes. But again, this piece, it has all these out-of-tune textures to it and captures the sense of uneasiness that Oppenheimer must have been feeling in that moment. Basically looking at the military-industrial complex in a nutshell in this person who's trying to intimidate him into revealing information. I really love the way that this specific scene is scored because it almost feels like a film noir. We have the black and white IMAX with the cars going down the road leading to the Atomic Energy Commission meeting. It's something about the Colegno strings and just the pulse of the moment. The cue Ground Zero, which we hear when the bomb is being risen to the top of the platform, is a very visceral, sort of confronting piece because it's very subtle at the beginning. It's this sort of crunching nuclear radioactive sound. And then as we continue to build up in the scene, it begins to become a little bit darker. And then eventually we hear Kitty's theme being played as we prepare for the bomb. And Kitty is out there putting the sheets up, and that becomes one of the calling cards is, you know, take the sheets in. You can just sort of hear the radioactive sparks and the static, and it almost just feels like radiating death. You know, we know what this bomb's about to do in Japan, and there's something about the visual of that bomb, especially when Oppenheimer goes up and stands next to it, and we see the creator with the creation. This piece perfectly visualizes just how intimidating this weapon is.
You know, they're hoisting it up in the air. You're seeing like people, they're like, okay, shit, they could actually destroy the whole human race. The music takes a crazy shift there and goes from like this lush, organic musical landscape to just 3 sounds, you know, one of thumping bass, and then one kind of nuclear reactor kind of sound, scratching sound on the speakers, and then this little metallic ticking. This just makes you feel like, okay, this is the ticking clock here.
The Trinity sequence, which is about 7 to 10 minutes, I believe, leading up to the detonation of the bomb, is a masterclass in and of itself in film scoring and also in directing and editing. This scene is all about building up to what the entire film has been leading to, and of course, what will inform Oppenheimer's entire life. And then all of a sudden, you'll hear a quartet and an octet, and then you'll hear a full string orchestra. And as we progress through this piece, the tempo changes, the time signature changes, it just builds in intensity. There's a lot of these sporadic, just sort of violin glissandos and clusters. I would describe it like chaos or like a swarm of bees or something. Kitty Comes to Testify is a really beautiful piece because it's an interesting take on Kitty's theme. So Kitty's theme are really these piano chords that are separated by periods of silence, but the way that he arranged it for this specific piece with the use of the cello to create a little bit of movement, it felt very beautiful, but also it felt defiant because this character at this moment is standing up to these people who are trying to take down her husband. And in this moment, she grows a lot of courage, I think, to really speak out as much as she can and try to defend herself and also to try to defend Oppenheimer.
Tear me down. What's his angle?
Do people need a reason to do the right thing? As he sees it.
This is also one of my favorite scenes in terms of the way that Göransson approached it, simply because of the fact that, again, there's no physical fights going on, but the dialogue is so pointy and so confronting, and the music really helps to enhance the action of this moment by literally scoring it like an action scene. This is sort of the moment when the boomerang has started to come back at Strauss. So Strauss has used all his resources to take down Oppie, but now in the end it's going to come back and haunt him in 1959.
The most important man who ever lived.
The last cue of the film is also really fantastic. We're basically riding on the C-sharp minor for a while, and as Oppenheimer and Einstein are talking, and then finally when we hit that, I believe we did, it goes to an E minor. And so it modulates in that exact moment, and it's just so spine tingling, and you hear the foot stomping and the increase, and you see those images of him visualizing the nuclear arsenal build up.
With Chris's films, how he ties the whole journey together.
Yeah.
The whole end ties it in with the beginning, and the details in the filmmaking, and how we also put the details of that in the score as well.
Alrighty, so let's dive into my arrangement. So basically I decided to tackle a few main tracks. So the first one is from the opening look trailer that came out just before the film was released. And it's basically like a rendition of the Manhattan Project cue. And then we go to trailer 1, which is a huge variation of the Oppenheimer theme with percussion and a big brass section. Fission is the opening of the film. Lowly Shoe Salesman, the first meeting between Oppenheimer and Strauss. Gravity Swallows Light. American Prometheus, the great scene of him walking down the road of Los Alamos. And then we go into Los Alamos, Ground Zero, and Power Stays in the Shadows. So let's dive straight into the beginning, which is really like the extended trailer for the film and is a variation on Kitty's theme in the Manhattan Project. So we start with D major 7, B minor, F sharp minor, A major with third in the bass, B minor, third in the bass. So basically this piece just builds and builds and builds, and each time we come around, we add in more instrumentation and more layers. So we'll begin with the sort of atmospheric sound. And here we're really all in the synth section. We have the dosimeter sound. Oppenheimer's theme. And just listen to all these sort of scratchy, cool sounds, which sort of replicate, again, the chaos of the bomb and of... You have the atmospheric wind sounds, which are all synth created. The low bass. And I love this Bombers Over Berlin sound from H.Z. Zebra. Just a thick, sort of guttural sound. And then so now we're going into the rendition of Kitty's theme. And this is one example of one of the percussive elements we were talking about earlier. It's not your traditional, big drum section, but it's just a ticking sound. And as we get into the track, we add in a few more of these percussive elements. But let's go to bar 29 and continue with this piece. This was a cool sound I heard in the recording, and it's almost like it sounded like a processed violin sound. So I went into Novo, a string library, and using this sound. It's a sort of weird bouncing synth effect. And then on bar 33, we bring in some of the strings longs. And then we add on the piano. Clock. Everything together. And this is one example of the so-called Oppen groove, sort of in motion. It just helps to create some really nice movement. And as we get further into the piece, you can see we add in even more short strings. An octave up. So the Oppenheimer horn effect, which I have labeled here the Oppenhorn, I think in reality it's actually basically like a processed, programmed it in Zebra 2. And we also have a guitar bend sound, which has sort of like a nice edgy tone. And then now here on bar 69, everything sort of comes together and we have the full synth section all playing together with the strings. So now let's listen to the section bar 81 through 117. We talked about the importance of the violin in the score, and here we have these big, sort of string runs creating this beautiful chaos above the texture. Then we have the string ostinatos come in. So harmonically what we have going on here is we have the Oppenheimer theme in E minor. And then G major, A minor with a 6, C major, and then D, E minor. And I love this chord. It's basically like a D major, but with a third in the bass and a 7. So all together it sounds like... And this variation is used at the end of the film as well. So let's take a look at the individual sections here. So the synth section is really, again, all about supplying that low end movement. So we have a low bass arpeggio, and then this synth pulse sound. Here comes the bass. The strings here are really supplying the sort of the chaos and the movement in this specific texture. So for trailer 1, again, we come back to this Oppenheimer theme, but we have it played with this big percussion section. Soloed out sounds like this. And all together. So getting a texture like this, you really want to lean into the brass section, which can really, deliver incredible amounts of power and intensity. Those brass players, everything comes from the gut, and so they can really get out. And it's such a rounded tone. And what's really cool about this thing harmonically is that we're going basically from E major to C major. And the thing about that is that they're in two different keys. So E major, basically, and then C. So it creates a very sort of exotic sound because we're going from something that feels regal and major to something that feels sort of darker and more dour. And something about that falling melody, the Oppenheimer theme, that just carries so much weight. It sort of falls into that E major chord. And again, falling into the C. Those big chords being played, we also have the orchestra supplying some sense of rhythm. So the strings sort of on their own. And then the strings and the brass together. And the synth section is really supplying a lot of that sort of low end, a lot of the big rounded sound that we get from this, this big texture. So let's listen to... So immediately when that bass hits, and I love Zebra 2 and Hans Zimmer Zebra because they have these big low end sounds. Here's an example. this percussion section, we're basically going from a straight rhythm into a more triplet kind of vibe. So we're going from 2, which to me sounds very, Mad Maxy. Gotta love some Junkie XL Mad Max. So there is the trailer 1. And there is nothing like some high string octaves to create some intensity. Usually, reserved for some really nice big sections, but the upper strings, when you double them together and play them in octaves, it's such a thick sound. And the brass is supplying the lower sound. So I really like this piece. It's a cool rendition on Oppie's theme. So now we are on to Fission, which is the opening cue of the film. And as we were talking about earlier, it opens up with this nice sort of thin string bed, and we're in the key of, I believe it's A flat minor. So let's listen to the strings here. So I believe we actually have the 5th of this in the bass. So we have A flat minor in octaves, and then the 5th in the bass. And what you'll often hear from music theory people is basically putting the 5th of the chord in the bass is always the most unstable.
Theory will take you only so far.
But it creates a really nice atmosphere. And then from there, the bass goes to E. So let's keep listening for when the harp comes in with Oppie's theme. And if you listen really, really closely, there's a super subtle sort of vocal element. And I used a children's choir for this. And actually the religious or choral element that we have here almost sounds like something like in a cathedral or something. It makes sense because we're seeing the images of fire, and we have the quote about Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, and for it he was chained to a rock and tortured for eternity. So it's a really great quote to open the film, and this music is just all about environment. So you can hear in the background there, we have the solo violin. Earlier in the trailer, we had the melody going from, and then going up a minor third. And what we're doing right here is basically going from the 1, and then just going up a major third. This next cue, the Lowly Shoe Salesman, is really all about introducing Oppenheimer and Strauss. We don't have any of the background yet on who these two men are and their backgrounds, and eventually later on in the film, we'll learn a lot more that reveals what happened at this encounter with Einstein and Oppie. But it's a sense of nostalgia, I think, and it's characterized by this high string chord, this A major chord. And this is just such a pretty chord. And this chord right here is basically a B major chord, but it has that 4 at the top. And then we go into Strauss's theme. And this piece is pretty simple when it comes to the strings. You just have the sort of high fluttery sound. And then you have the string chords. And then of course you have the harp melody. Really quickly, I want to mention this Gravity Swallows Light, and we're basically playing G minor, and then D minor with a third in the bass, and then a C minor with a third in the bass, and then an E minor. And the reason this sounds really nice is because we're going from, again, that G minor, down, C minor. And what we're doing here is we're actually changing keys because E minor is not in the same key as G minor. So we're using this G as a pivot note. C minor, keeping the G, and then to an E minor. So using pivot notes is basically a great way of getting from one chord to another, even if they aren't in the same key. James Horner really loves using pivot notes. For example, A Beautiful Mind. So those chords are not in the same key, but he's using this D flat as a pivot. You know, so it's a cool little technique, and it adds a little bit of eeriness to this chord progression. We're on to American Prometheus, and I think this track starts during the dialogue conversation between Oppenheimer and Isadora Robbie. And we start off with these string shorts, and then Oppenheimer's melody, down a half step. So let's listen to that in context. Really dig that line. And then we go into the big, you know, donning the hat and the pipe and walking down the street over here on bar 338. Man, that Oppie theme. And one of the reasons that this specific chord progression has a lot of impact is, again, because it's using the third of the chord. So F sharp minor, A major, and then the 2 of C sharp minor. And this is basically just B major with that third in the bass. So it's just yet another take on the Oppenheimer theme, but in this case it's used in a really big context. This is really the first time in the film we're seeing Oppenheimer in terms of the chronology, with the pipe and with the hat walking down the street. It's sort of him in the Oppenheimer style. So I just love that it's a big rendition of his thematic material. And going into Los Alamos, we have the Oppenheimer groove. If you listen to those chords, those are the exact same chords from Gravity Swallows Light. So it's the Gravity Swallows Light theme here. And on bar 369, we go into a rendition of Kitty's theme. Again, so this is when we first cut to Oppenheimer and Kitty and Peter coming into Los Alamos for the first time. Let's just check out this texture in all the individual sections. So we'll start off with the keys and harps. Then we'll add the percussion. The synths. Finally, the strings. Ground Zero, we have that sound of the bomb, super atmospheric, and it's a patch called the Oppenheimer Growl. This section at bar 425 is a more sort of romantic take on the Oppenheimer theme with the solo violin. Stays in the Shadows is one of those Strauss cues. So we start off with the harp. We come in with these pizzicatos here, which are sort of like soft little stabs. We have low strings. And then we go into a triplet, so we have at 4:55 is really when Kitty throws the glass across the room and says it's always Strauss, and realizes that Strauss has been engineering this entire thing. And we have this violin cluster. And that's the Joshua Bell violin from Embertone. And all the while, the pizzicatos are just maintaining in the background. Pizzicatos plus the violins. And then the triplets. And again, it's just so cool how you can have something as romantic as, you know, that Strauss cue. And then something as sort of intense and badass as American Prometheus. And then even Power Stays in the Shadows has elements of sort of your film noir kind of tones with the harp and everything, but it feels modern because of the, you know, the pizzicatos. And it's the same for Groves' theme. Groves definitely sounds like a very modern kind of timeless theme as opposed to, you know, a more traditional. So this score so beautifully blends between the sort of cutting edge modern sound, but also the classic use of orchestra and some really beautiful orchestral textures. But the tempo is really an important part. As you can see in the this ending cue here, you can see how tempo is used to create this sense of anxiety and tension. And this last cue has so much anxiety that we can really feel through Cillian Murphy's eyes and the way that we're seeing the nuclear arsenals building up. But the tempo changes, like the one here, it almost just makes it feel a little bit like the floor beneath your feet are shifting, which in the case of this film is definitely a pro. Because what you're trying to do is, again, trying to create the experience of Oppenheimer through the use of music.
So if you had to summarize the Oppenheimer experience, what would you say?
I would say it was a crazy experience. You know, it was very intense, but also so rewarding, and working on something that I think is gonna, you know, create a conversation, creative discussion.
So there is Behind the Score Oppenheimer. Thank you guys so much for joining me here today. This has been a lot of fun putting this one together and doing the research and getting to watch the film a few more times. Everything about this movie for me characterizes what film is all about, telling human stories that relate to all of us and that really transcend the format. This is a movie that's so much more than just a movie. It's something that tells us about history, about the human experience, about who this man was, and the music and the visuals all play into that and help deliver us this very personal experience. So I'm just in awe of what Göransson has done and what the whole team has done. I also wanted to share with you guys some exciting news that I just released an 8-part series for the History Channel that I directed and edited and also did the music for, called Kennedy.
Kennedy. John F. Kennedy.
And the film is about JFK and follows his life all the way from his birth through to the assassination. And I tried to really get into his own personal perspective, following him as he goes through school and becomes a politician, and all of the various crises that he faced as president. And that's part of the reason why when I saw Oppenheimer, I was just in the middle of finishing the series, and I was stunned at how, again, Nolan was able to take such a big subject, being Oppenheimer's life, and make it so accessible. And that's sort of what I was trying to do in the documentary format over these 8 episodes. But Kennedy is available on VOD platforms like Amazon and iTunes, and Oppenheimer is available now on physical release 4K, and are also available on physical release vinyl with this amazing design. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a great holiday season, and I'll see you again soon.